Ever since humans first looked up at the night sky, they had wondered if they were alone in the universe. For decades, scientists had speculated about the possibility of intelligent life on distant planets, debating quietly in labs and conferences. But the idea had mostly remained a dream, a concept for science fiction books and movies. Then, one day, that dream became a reality. Humanity received a signal unlike anything ever encountered before. It wasn't just random noise or a cosmic anomaly. It was a structured, intelligent communication. The message came from a distant star system, from beings who called themselves the Zeph. Their language was complex, but with the help of Earth's best linguists and AI translation systems, the basic meaning was soon understood. The Zephyrians were intelligent, curious, and surprisingly polite. But more than that, they were facing a crisis. A mysterious illness had begun spreading across their population, threatening the very survival of their civilization, and they wanted help from humans. The news shocked the entire world. For the first time, humanity was no longer alone in the universe in a personal, interactive sense. For the first time, an alien species was asking humans for something specific: medical assistance. Governments, scientific organizations, and international space agencies immediately went into action. There were endless debates on how to respond. Who would go? What equipment should be sent? How could humans help a species so biologically different from themselves? Doctors, virologists, epidemiologists, and medical researchers were consulted. Engineers and space travel experts worked feverishly to develop safe transportation methods and protective systems. Every nation wanted to participate, but at the same time, there were concerns about safety. What if the aliens were contagious in ways humans didn't understand? What if their biology was dangerous, or their environment hostile to humans? Despite these fears, the excitement in the scientific community was overwhelming. This was more than a chance to make history. It was a chance to truly unite humanity in a shared mission. Space agencies worked together for the first time on a large-scale interstellar medical mission. Universities, hospitals, and research centers offered volunteers. People around the world watched as doctors and scientists were trained for the unprecedented journey. They learned about the Zephyrians' biology as far as it could be understood, studied alien anatomy from limited data, and practiced medical procedures that might be adaptable to a completely new physiology. The sense of responsibility weighed heavily on the volunteers. These were people who had trained for decades, but nothing could prepare them fully for this. They weren't just representing their countries, they were representing humanity as a whole. Meanwhile, Earth's military leaders observed the preparations with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Space had always been considered a frontier for exploration, but now it was also a frontier of vulnerability. The fact that humans were sending medical teams to another civilization was seen as admirable. But what if something went wrong? The Zephyrians had sent polite requests, but the unknown nature of interstellar travel and alien interaction left room for countless uncertainties. Military advisors began planning contingencies, ensuring that Earth could respond quickly if the situation turned dangerous. Ships were evaluated for defense readiness, communication protocols were reviewed, and emergency evacuation plans were drafted. Though there was no intention of using force, the possibility had to be considered. After all, humanity was stepping into uncharted territory, a place where mistakes could have catastrophic consequences. At the same time, media outlets erupted with stories of the Zephyrians and the upcoming mission. News channels, newspapers, and online platforms shared everything they could about the aliens, the illness, and the preparation efforts. Scientists and astronauts gave interviews, and social media buzzed with speculation, excitement, and even fear. People around the world were captivated. Children dreamed of space travel. Adults debated whether humanity was ready for such a responsibility. The mission quickly became a symbol of hope, curiosity, and human ingenuity. It was a moment when people paused to consider their place in the universe, imagining what it would be like to encounter a completely alien civilization and to help them in their time of need. The Zephyrians themselves were carefully observing Earth's response. Their message had been sent with both urgency and respect. They wanted assistance, yes, but they also wanted reassurance that humans could be trusted. They monitored Earth's broadcasts and communications, studying human behavior, culture, and intentions. From their perspective, the arrival of human experts wasn't just about medicine. It was about establishing a relationship, laying the foundation for future interaction and collaboration. And humans were learning the same lessons in reverse. While preparing for medical aid, they had to study diplomacy, cross-cultural understanding, and the importance of caution and patience when dealing with intelligent beings whose thought processes and societal norms were entirely alien. As the day of departure approached, the tension and excitement on Earth grew palpable. Families of volunteers were anxious, watching their loved ones prepare for a journey that might last years. Scientists triple-checked medical supplies, recalculated every risk, and ran simulations of possible scenarios. The volunteers themselves were nervous but determined. Many reflected on their training, thinking about the thousands of patients they had helped back on Earth and realizing that this mission represented the ultimate test of their skills and courage. Each team member understood that failure could have consequences far beyond themselves. It could affect humanity's reputation and the potential for peaceful interstellar relations for generations to come. Despite the careful planning, there were countless unknowns. How would humans survive in the Zephyrians' environment? What adaptations would their bodies require? How would they communicate in real time, given the limits of translation technology? These questions kept scientists up at night. They ran through endless simulations, preparing for diseases, accidents, or misunderstandings that could spiral out of control. Yet, even with the risks, the mission represented a chance to save lives, to learn, and to prove that humanity could rise to challenges far beyond the Earth. The story of humanity, preparing to help the Zephyrians, was also a story of collaboration. People from different nations, cultures, and professions had come together in a way rarely seen in history. Engineers, doctors, linguists, diplomats, and astronauts worked side by side, breaking barriers and sharing knowledge. There were moments of friction and disagreement, but ultimately, a shared sense of purpose overcame differences. This collaboration demonstrated what humanity could achieve when united by a common goal, a lesson that extended far beyond space travel and alien contact. And so, as the ships were readied and volunteers prepared to leave Earth behind, the world watched with bated breath. There was pride, curiosity, and fear, but above all, there was hope. Hope that humans could help the Zephyrians, that understanding and empathy could bridge unimaginable differences, and that this mission could mark the beginning of a new chapter for life in the universe. Little did anyone know, however, that the journey would not go exactly as planned. What was meant to be a straightforward medical mission would soon be complicated by miscommunication, misunderstanding, and the unexpected arrival of Earth's most powerful war machines. But in this moment, before any mistakes were made, humanity's focus was clear: to answer a call for help from across the stars, to bring knowledge, compassion, and healing to a species unlike any they had ever known. For the first time, humans were stepping into the cosmos not just as explorers or conquerors, but as doctors, helpers, and ambassadors. The sense of responsibility was immense, the stakes were higher than ever, and the adventure was only just beginning. As the ships carrying humans approached the Zephyrian system, the sense of excitement and anticipation among the crew was palpable, but it was quickly mixed with tension. While the volunteers had trained for years for this mission, nothing could fully prepare them for the reality of interstellar travel and the enormity of what awaited them. They had studied Zephyrian biology, practiced alien medical procedures, and simulated countless emergencies, but the unknowns of another world still loomed like shadows over every decision. Every day of the journey, they reviewed protocols, checked equipment, and prepared mentally for the responsibility that rested on their shoulders. Yet, even in these preparations, small cracks in coordination were beginning to show on Earth. However, the story was beginning to take an unexpected turn. While scientists and doctors were focused on medical preparations, the military was quietly reviewing its own contingency plans. Unlike the doctors, the military saw the Zephyrians not just as a civilization in need but as a potential unknown threat. Earth had never encountered alien life before, and the possibilities, good and bad, were endless. Somewhere between caution and over-preparation, a critical miscommunication began to develop. Orders were drafted for a security escort for the medical team, which made sense on paper, but the lines between escort and offensive force became blurred. Documents were misread, commands were misunderstood, and in the bureaucracy of global military coordination, a catastrophic error was quietly set into motion. Meanwhile, on board the human ships, the medical teams were focused on their mission. Dr. Annika Rowe, one of the lead virologists, spent hours reviewing Zephyrian physiology, trying to understand how to adapt Earth-based medical treatments for a species with entirely different biological systems. She practiced diagnostic techniques, medication administration, and even communication gestures designed to calm alien patients. Other team members ran simulations, reviewed emergency protocols, and double-checked the specialized equipment packed for the mission. Every step was meticulous, every detail mattered. And yet, none of these preparations accounted for the fact that the ships carrying them were not just for medical purposes. They were accompanied by the heaviest military firepower humanity had ever deployed. As the fleet drew closer to the Zephyrian homeworld, Earth realized the magnitude of the mistake. Somewhere in the chain of command, the plan to send a small, specialized team of doctors had been misinterpreted as a request for a full military escort. What had been intended as a subtle layer of security became, in bureaucratic translation, a fleet of Dreadnought-class warships. These enormous vessels, bristling with weapons and armored to withstand any conceivable threat, dwarfed the medical ships in both size and intimidation. The humans had inadvertently transformed a mission of healing into a show of overwhelming force. The news of this miscommunication never reached the volunteers in time. They remained focused on their medical mission, unaware of the massive warships following behind them. On board the lead medical vessel, Dr. Rowe and her colleagues reviewed their schedules, practiced communication protocols, and discussed the potential cultural sensitivities of interacting with the Zephyrians. They planned how to approach the alien society gently, how to offer assistance without imposing, and how to maintain trust in an unfamiliar environment. They were dedicated entirely to their humanitarian goal, believing the journey would be a peaceful, collaborative endeavor. Back on the Zephyrian side, signals from the approaching fleet began to trigger concern. Zephyrian monitoring systems detected massive, heavily armed vessels moving in close formation, following the smaller, seemingly unarmed ships. The aliens, expecting only medical personnel, were perplexed and alarmed. Their scientists and leaders quickly tried to analyze the situation, but the arrival of these enormous war machines created confusion and fear. From their perspective, this was not a call for aid. It looked like a demonstration of overwhelming power. Zephyrians are intelligent and cautious, and while they had initially approached humans with hope, they were now faced with a display that could easily be interpreted as a threat. The tension mounted as both sides approached the critical point of contact. On Earth's, attempts were made to clarify the error. Military officers sent urgent messages explaining that the Dreadnoughts were not meant to intimidate but to protect. Diplomatic teams scrambled to adjust their communication protocols, hoping to reach the Zephyrians before any hostile reactions occurred. However, the vast distances of space made immediate corrections nearly impossible. By the time messages arrived, both humans and Zephyrians were already preparing for an encounter that had the potential to escalate dangerously. On the ships themselves, humans began to notice subtle signs of Zephyrian concern. Communication channels initially used to broadcast greetings and reassurance were met with delayed or cautious responses. Zephyrian signals, once friendly and cooperative, became measured and hesitant. The humans could sense the shift in tone, but without full understanding of the alien language and cultural context, they could only guess at the reason. Every maneuver, every adjustment of the ships had to be done with extreme care. One wrong action could trigger panic, defensive measures, or even attack. Inside the lead medical ship, the atmosphere shifted from excitement to cautious anxiety. Volunteers, while unaware of the full scale of the military presence, sensed that something was different. Reports from sensors indicated that the Zephyrians were activating defensive protocols, and subtle warning signals began to appear in monitoring systems. Dr. Rowe and her colleagues continued their work, trying to remain focused on their mission, but a sense of unease hung in the air. They could feel that their presence was being misunderstood, though they did not yet know why. Meanwhile, Earth's military leaders debated what actions to take. Some argued that the Dreadnoughts should maintain their position but remain passive, signaling strength without aggression. Others warned that even a passive display of force could provoke panic, leading the Zephyrians to retaliate in ways humans could not predict. Messages were sent back and forth between Earth, the fleet, and the volunteers, each attempting to clarify intentions. But the complex bureaucracy, combined with delays in interstellar communication, made quick resolution impossible. The humans were caught in a delicate balancing act, showing readiness without provoking hostility. As the fleet entered the Zephyrian system, the criticality of the moment became clear. Both humans and aliens were now acutely aware of each other's presence, and both sides were trying to interpret intentions. Every move mattered. On the human side, the medical team prepared to land and offer assistance, still confident that cooperation could be achieved. On the Zephyrian side, defensive measures were fully engaged, ready to respond if they perceived any aggression. A simple misunderstanding could turn a mission of healing into a catastrophe. The story of the rising challenge lay in this perfect storm of miscommunication, cultural differences, and the sheer scale of the forces involved. Humanity's greatest achievement being invited to aid an alien civilization was suddenly at risk of being undone by its own bureaucracy. Doctors and scientists had trained for years to bring life and healing, but now they were accompanied by symbols of power that could easily be misinterpreted. The stakes were higher than anyone had imagined, and the margin for error was terrifyingly small. That as the ships moved closer, Dr. Rowe and her colleagues continued their preparations. They practiced emergency medical procedures, rehearsed communication protocols, and mentally prepared for the unknown challenges of working with a completely alien species. They focused on what they could control: their own actions, their own behavior, and their ability to remain calm and compassionate. Even as tension mounted outside the ships, the medical team clung to their mission, hoping that diplomacy, patience, and understanding could prevent disaster. And so, the rising challenge was fully set. Humanity faced the dual threats of misunderstanding and escalation. They had to navigate the delicate balance of proving they meant no harm while still projecting safety for their own personnel. The Zephyrians, expecting a team of healers, were confronted with a fleet of massive warships, unsure whether to trust or defend. Both sides teetered on the edge of conflict, and the very first contact hung in the balance, with the fate of interstellar relations depending on how quickly and carefully the misunderstanding could be resolved. The next moments would be crucial, as the world, indeed the galaxy, watched humanity's first true test of diplomacy, courage, and restraint in the vastness of space. The moment of contact had arrived. and the tension in the Zephyrian system reached a peak that neither humans nor aliens had fully anticipated. As the human fleet approached, the Zephyrians observed the massive warships in close formation with the smaller medical vessels. From their perspective, these ships were not just enormous, they were bristling with weapons capable of destruction on a scale they had never witnessed. For the Zephyrians, who had expected a small, specialized team of doctors, this display of human military might was bewildering and alarming. The calm, polite beings who had initially reached out for help were now faced with a scenario that could be interpreted as hostility. Their sensors detected the drones and defense systems of the Dreadnoughts, and internal alarms began to flash across Zephyrian command centers. Every second of the humans' approach felt heavier with uncertainty. On board the lead human medical ship, Dr. Annika Rowe and her colleagues were focused entirely on their mission. Yet the first signs of Zephyrian concern began to filter through their sensors, that aliens were activating what appeared to be defensive energy shields, and some of their smaller patrol craft began moving in ways that suggested caution or preparation for conflict. The humans did not yet fully understand the implications, but they could sense the shift in tone. Communication signals from the Zephyrians were becoming more measured and less responsive. A subtle unease filled the ship's corridors, and the medical team realized that the situation required extreme care. Every decision, every movement, had the potential to escalate into disaster. Meanwhile, the Dreadnoughts, which had been sent mistakenly as a show of security, loomed over the smaller ships like giants of steel and firepower. Their presence, while intended to protect, added a layer of intimidation that neither the humans aboard the medical vessels nor the Zephyrians could ignore. On Earth, military commanders monitored the situation closely, issuing guidance and urgent corrections, but the vast distances of space meant that any clarification would take hours to reach the fleet. The humans were caught in a tense standoff, operating with incomplete information, while the Zephyrians interpreted their every move through the lens of caution. That as the human fleet entered the upper atmosphere of the Zephyrian planet, small missteps and misread signals threatened to turn the situation into a catastrophe. One of the Dreadnoughts adjusted its trajectory slightly, a routine maneuver to maintain formation, but sensors aboard the Zephyrian vessels interpreted it as a potential attack. In response, the aliens activated defensive energy fields and scrambled patrol drones to intercept. The tension on both sides escalated, and a moment that should have been historic for cooperation was now precariously close to disaster. The Zephyrians, despite their intelligence and experience, were unprepared for the sight of weapons so advanced and massive, and they reacted in ways designed to protect their society. On the human medical ship, Dr. Rowe and her team continued to prepare for their mission, but they could feel the anxiety spreading among the crew. Medical professionals trained to stay calm under pressure now faced a situation where misunderstanding could result in violence. The sound of alarms from sensors and communication alerts reminded them constantly of the fragile balance in which they were operating. The doctors reviewed emergency protocols for alien contamination and injury, knowing that even a minor misstep could have severe consequences. Yet, their determination remained steadfast. They had a mission to complete, and they would not abandon it. Efforts to communicate the peaceful intent of the mission were complicated by technical limitations and cultural misunderstandings. The Zephyrians' language, though partially decoded, relied heavily on context, emotion, and subtle nuances that human translators could not fully replicate. Simple phrases meant to reassure could be misinterpreted as commands or threats. Likewise, gestures intended as polite or non-threatening could be read differently by an alien culture. That humans worked tirelessly to ensure clarity, using visual signals, energy patterns, and a combination of language and symbols to convey their intentions. Yet the Zephyrians remained cautious, and their defensive measures continued to grow in intensity. Inside the Zephyrian command centers, leaders debated how to respond to this unprecedented scenario. On one hand, the aliens recognized that the initial message from Earth had requested medical aid, and they wanted to maintain the possibility of cooperation. On the other hand, the appearance of massive, armed vessels could not be ignored. Their sensors and military advisors warned of potential danger, and internal discussions considered the worst-case scenarios. Every move was weighed carefully, knowing that a single aggressive action could escalate into full-scale conflict. Zephyrian society, although advanced, had never faced a misunderstanding of this magnitude with another intelligent civilization. As the standoff continued, Earth's military commanders tried to issue real-time corrections. They sent messages clarifying that the Dreadnoughts were there only as protection and not as an offensive force. They urged restraint, instructed the fleet to maintain passive postures, and reminded the medical teams to prioritize communication and diplomacy. However, these messages faced delays due to the vast interstellar distances. Hours could pass before a correction reached the fleet, leaving the humans in a situation where every second was critical. The medical team had to rely on their judgment, intuition, and calm decision-making to avoid catastrophe. The critical moment came when one of the Zephyrian patrol drones moved closer to the human medical ship, signaling both curiosity and caution. Sensors detected rapid energy fluctuations, and alarms briefly triggered on human consoles. Dr. Rowe quickly instructed her team to remain calm, to avoid any sudden movements, and to focus on peaceful engagement. The Zephyrians were testing, probing, and signaling, unsure of whether humans were a threat or allies. The humans responded with a combination of lights, gestures, and prearranged communication patterns, trying to convey that their intentions were purely humanitarian. Every action was deliberate, slow, and carefully considered, as even the smallest misstep could escalate into a disastrous confrontation during this tense period. Both humans and Zephyrians began to realize the complexity of their misunderstanding. For the humans, the sheer scale of the Dreadnoughts, combined with the aliens' defensive responses, made it clear that perception could easily outweigh intent. For the Zephyrians, the sight of human medical professionals striving to communicate amidst a backdrop of massive warships revealed the duality. Humans were both a potential threat and a potential partner. The situation became a delicate dance, where gestures, energy signals, and small movements carried enormous weight. The human medical team also had to contend with the psychological strain of the standoff. Crew members, trained for medical crises, were now thrust into an entirely different type of emergency, one of interstellar diplomacy and near sleep deprivation, stress, and the pressure of representing humanity weighed heavily on everyone aboard the medical vessel. Dr. Rowe spent hours reassuring her colleagues, reminding them to focus on their mission, on the lives they were meant to save, and on the long-term goal of peaceful cooperation. She emphasized patience, empathy, and clarity in communication, knowing that these human qualities were their greatest tools in the crisis. As the hours dragged on, small breakthroughs began to emerge. By carefully observing Zephyrian reactions and adjusting signals, humans managed to convey fragments of reassurance. A minor energy adjustment here, a calm visual signal there. Each successful interaction helped reduce tension incrementally. Both sides were learning, adapting, and testing limits. It became a high-stakes experiment in understanding. How could two entirely different civilizations, with no shared history, no shared culture, and no shared language, bridge a misunderstanding that could otherwise destroy everything? The answer lay in patience, careful observation, and mutual recognition of intent. Finally, at the peak of the standoff, a human communication officer managed to transmit a message in a form Zephyrians could understand. The fleet was not there to attack. The Dreadnoughts were protective rather than aggressive, and the mission was entirely humanitarian. The message took minutes to be received and processed, but when it finally reached Zephyrian leaders, a collective sense of relief began to spread. Their defensive postures were cautiously relaxed, and the patrol drones began to withdraw. The critical moment, which could have ended in disaster, began to resolve through careful diplomacy, observation, and human ingenuity. In the end, the escalation phase highlighted the fragility of first contact between civilizations. A small miscommunication had almost led to disaster, and both humans and Zephyrians were reminded of the dangers inherent in misunderstanding and assumption. The human medical team, despite facing a situation entirely outside their training, had navigated the crisis through calm, deliberate action and a focus on mission priorities. The Zephyrians, despite fear and uncertainty, had demonstrated their ability to observe, analyze, and adjust in the face of an unknown and potentially dangerous scenario. By the close of this phase, the situation was stabilized enough to allow humans to move forward with their mission. The Dreadnoughts maintained a passive posture. The Zephyrians had cautiously accepted continued engagement, and the human medical team was finally able to focus on its original purpose. But the lessons of this critical moment were clear. Even the best intentions can be misinterpreted, and the universe is full of unpredictable variables that can turn hope into tension in an instant. Trust, patience, and understanding would be essential in moving forward, and both species had already begun learning these lessons under the highest stakes imaginable. After the tense standoff and the near disaster that had unfolded in the Zephyrian system, a fragile sense of calm finally began to settle. The humans had managed to convey their peaceful intentions, and the Zephyrians, with careful observation, began to respond in kind. It was not a sudden relief or a moment of euphoria. It was gradual, like the first light of dawn creeping across a dark horizon. The realization that miscommunication had almost caused a catastrophic misunderstanding left both sides cautious, but willing to try again. This was the moment when resolution began to take shape, not through force or speed, but through patience, empathy, and careful strategy. The human medical team, led by Dr. Annika Rowe, took a deep breath, steadying themselves for what would be the most delicate operation of their careers. The initial goal had been simple: land on the Zephyrian planet, assess the medical situation, and provide assistance to the sick and dying. But after the recent events, every decision now carried the weight of diplomacy, survival, and first impressions for humanity itself. The medical staff understood that their professionalism alone would not be enough. They needed to demonstrate trustworthiness through every gesture, every action, and every choice they made. The first challenge was approaching the Zephyrian surface without triggering fear or defensive reactions. The medical ship moved slowly, carefully, following precise patterns that had been agreed upon after analyzing the standoff. Light signals were used as indicators of intent, and sensors continuously monitored Zephyrian responses. Dr. Rowe and her team kept their emotions in check. Excitement and relief were tempered with focus and caution. Any display of overconfidence or sudden movement could have reversed the fragile progress made in the critical standoff. On the Zephyrian side, leaders and scientists closely watched the approaching human vessels. There was still a lingering suspicion after all. The sight of massive dreadnoughts had shaken them, but they were increasingly convinced that the humans' intentions were genuine. By interpreting subtle changes in the human signals and movement patterns, the Zephyrians realized that the fleet was not threatening but protective, and that the humans themselves were eager to engage peacefully. It was a lesson in careful observation and cautious optimism. Even when fear is high, discernment can guide actions toward collaboration. As the medical ship finally descended into the Zephyrian environment, both sides marveled at the progress that had been made. The humans had adapted to the alien atmosphere using advanced technology, while the Zephyrians had prepared safe landing zones and energy corridors to ensure the operation could proceed without accidents. There was a quiet beauty in the cooperation that emerged. A contrast to the earlier tension. Dr. Rowe and her colleagues prepared their medical equipment and protective suits, aware that their first steps on this alien world would symbolize much more than a simple landing, represented humanity's goodwill and capability to honor a promise of help. The first interactions with the population were carefully orchestrated. Humans approached slowly, their gestures deliberate and non-threatening. Small medical demonstrations were performed to show the aliens that their intentions were purely healing. In response, the Zephyrians observed, studied, and cautiously engaged. Their biology was complex, their physiology unlike anything humans had encountered, but the curiosity and intelligence that had first prompted their plea for help now allowed them to trust, to a degree, in the humans' skills and empathy. Dr. Rowe and her team felt a cautious exhilaration as the first patients were treated, realizing that despite the prior miscommunications and tensions, their mission was finally moving forward. Throughout the medical operations, that humans were forced to innovate constantly. Zephyrian anatomy and physiology presented unprecedented challenges. Some of their vital systems did not correspond directly to anything on Earth, requiring the medical team to develop novel techniques in real time. The humans relied not only on their training but also on observation, improvisation, and collaboration with Zephyrian assistants who had been carefully selected to communicate knowledge about their species. It was an extraordinary partnership. Humans brought medical expertise and technical equipment, while Zephyrians provided insight into their biology, culture, and social practices. The process was slow, meticulous, and deeply rewarding, demonstrating that understanding and collaboration could overcome even the most extreme differences. As days passed, the plague that had threatened Zephyrian society began to retreat. Medications, treatments, and procedures were administered with precision, gradually saving lives and restoring hope. Families once consumed by fear and illness now witnessed the efficacy of human intervention. Trust deepened, and the initial apprehension toward humans began to transform into cautious friendship. Dr. Rowe and her team became symbols of humanity's capacity for empathy, skill, and responsibility. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced the possibility that cooperation, rather than fear, was the most effective approach in a universe filled with unknowns. Even the Dreadnoughts, once looming symbols of unintended intimidation, became assets in this phase of resolution. Their presence ensured that no accidental interference or hostile action could jeopardize the medical work. Yet, the humans had to manage them carefully, constantly signaling their passive intent to the Zephyrians, who remained sensitive to even minor gestures. What had initially seemed a disastrous misstep now played a positive role. The Dreadnoughts became guardians of the mission, protecting lives while the real work, understanding, and collaboration was carried out. It was a perfect example of how errors, when managed with patience and intelligence, could be transformed into opportunities. During the resolution phase, communication between humans and Zephyrians evolved beyond simple signals and gestures. Mutual curiosity led to experimentation with language, symbols, and even art forms to convey ideas. Dr. Rowe and her team learned about Zephyrian culture, history, and social structures, realizing that medicine alone was insufficient for building trust. They had to acknowledge the aliens' values, traditions, and concerns. In turn, Zephyrians began to understand humanity not only as a species capable of technical skill, but also as one capable of empathy, reflection, and patience. What began as a miscommunication had transformed into a profound opportunity for interspecies learning. As weeks passed, the mission began to achieve its original goals fully. Zephyrian lives were being saved, knowledge was being exchanged, and both sides began to plan for future cooperation. The humans documented everything meticulously, creating records that could be used for training, research, and future interstellar missions. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, shared insights into their biology, technology, and culture that were previously unknown to humanity. The resolution was not simply the end of a crisis. It was the creation of a foundation for ongoing partnership and mutual respect. Both species had learned that first impressions mattered. that errors could have massive consequences, and that trust required careful, consistent effort. Dr. Rowe and her colleagues reflected on the journey that had brought them here. They had trained for years, studied endlessly, and prepared for medical emergencies. But the challenges they had faced in navigating misunderstanding, fear, and cultural differences had taught them lessons beyond textbooks and simulations. They had experienced firsthand how fragile trust could be, how quickly fear could escalate, and how deliberate, thoughtful action could restore hope. The resolution was as much about healing relationships as it was about healing bodies. By the end of this phase, the mission could be considered a success on multiple levels. The Zephyrians were healthy, grateful, and cautiously optimistic about continued collaboration. The human medical team had proven its capability, resilience, and adaptability under unprecedented circumstances. Even the initially intimidating Dreadnoughts had found their place, symbolizing not aggression but protection and support. What had begun as a potentially disastrous miscommunication had been transformed into a historic achievement in diplomacy, science, and interstellar cooperation. The resolution of this crisis also had broader implications. On Earth, leaders and the public watched the developments with awe and relief. Humanity had learned valuable lessons about communication, preparation, and humility. The incident would shape future protocols for interstellar missions, ensuring that clarity, patience, and understanding were prioritized over assumptions, speed, or displays of power. The story of the resolution became a symbol of what could be achieved when caution, intelligence, and empathy guided action, even in the most complex and unpredictable circumstances. In the end, what defined this phase was the transformation of fear into trust, tension into collaboration, and misunderstanding into clarity. The humans had not simply accomplished a medical mission. They had demonstrated that even the gravest errors and misunderstandings could be resolved through patience, deliberate action, and mutual respect. The resolution was a testament to the power of human ingenuity, compassion, and the willingness to learn from mistakes, and it laid the groundwork for an entirely new chapter in the relationship between Earth and the Zephyrians. After the successful completion of the mission, when the human medical team finally prepared to return to Earth, a profound sense of reflection swept over both humans and Zephyrians. The events that had unfolded, beginning with a call for help, escalating through tension, miscommunication, and near disaster, and finally resolving into cooperation, left a lasting impression on everyone involved. For the humans, the experience had been more than just a mission to save lives. It had been a journey of understanding, patience, and self-discovery. They realized that first contact with an entirely new civilization was not only a test of knowledge and skill, but also a test of empathy, humility, and the ability to navigate uncertainty. As the medical team prepared for departure, Dr. Annika Rowe and her colleagues took stock of everything they had experienced. They had witnessed fear and suspicion, learned to communicate across impossible cultural and biological barriers, and observed the deep intelligence and emotional complexity of an alien society. These lessons would stay with them forever. More than the scientific achievements or the medical breakthroughs, the humans recognized the importance of trust. Trust, they understood, was not something given freely. It was built carefully, moment by moment, through consistent actions that demonstrated honesty, patience, and genuine concern. The near miss during the fleet's arrival had shown them how fragile that trust could be, and yet, by the end of their mission, it had been strengthened far beyond what they had imagined possible. On the Zephyrian side, leaders and citizens alike reflected on the events with equal intensity. They had initially reached out to humanity in a moment of vulnerability, asking for help in the midst of a deadly plague. The arrival of humans had been confusing, frightening, and at times threatening, especially when accompanied by massive warships, but the resolution had left a lasting impact. The Zephyrians saw that humans were capable not only of advanced technology and medical skill but also of patience, empathy, and understanding. They realized that humanity could be a reliable ally, one willing to put itself at risk to help another species. This understanding became the foundation for a new sense of respect and cautious optimism about future collaboration. The aftermath of the mission also prompted deep reflection among Earth's leaders and citizens. The initial miscommunication that had sent Dreadnoughts instead of doctors became a subject of analysis and learning. While it had created a dangerous situation, it also highlighted the adaptability, intelligence, and moral strength of humanity. People realized that mistakes, when acknowledged and corrected, could lead to growth and achievement rather than disaster. Governments around the world began to rethink protocols for interstellar missions, placing a higher priority on clear communication, empathy, and understanding of cultural differences. They recognized that in the vastness of space, technological superiority alone was insufficient. Diplomacy, patience, and careful observation were equally, if not more, important. The experience transformed the medical team in ways that went beyond their professional expertise. Doctors, scientists, and support staff had faced challenges that no textbook could have prepared them for. They had learned to think creatively under pressure, to improvise solutions in unfamiliar circumstances, and to remain calm when every signal suggested potential danger. The lessons were deeply human. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act thoughtfully in spite of it. Empathy was not simply understanding another being, but finding ways to connect, communicate, and assist across unimaginable differences. And leadership was not about authority or control, but about guiding others through uncertainty with patience, clarity, and integrity. Back on Earth, the story of the mission inspired people in ways that were unexpected. Media coverage, scientific reports, and personal accounts from the volunteers highlighted not only the technical achievements, but also the moral and emotional journey. Children read stories of humans working alongside aliens to save lives, imagining themselves as future explorers, doctors, or diplomats. Scientists were inspired to study interspecies communication, alien biology, and emergency preparedness with renewed vigor. Leaders considered the philosophical implications. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and the responsibilities of coexistence and collaboration were now real, immediate, and unavoidable. The mission also left lasting lessons for the military and strategic planners. The accidental dispatch of dreadnoughts had demonstrated how easily fear and assumption could escalate a situation. Military leaders realized that force alone could not secure trust, and that symbols of power could be misinterpreted in ways that jeopardized even the most peaceful intentions. Protocols were revised to ensure that humanitarian missions remained focused on their goals, with security measures that were supportive rather than threatening. The event became a case study in restraint, showing that the most important battles are often won not with weapons, but with patience, empathy, and careful communication. For the humans who had worked directly with the aftermath was also intensely personal. Many had formed bonds with the aliens, learning to recognize their emotional cues, their curiosity, and their intelligence. Even as the medical team prepared to leave, these connections lingered. The volunteers reflected on the shared triumphs: a successful treatment administered, a life saved, a misunderstanding resolved. Each small victory was a reminder of the power of collaboration, and each challenge overcome reinforced the idea that hope and determination could prevail even in the most alien and uncertain circumstances. The Zephyr, too, reflected deeply on the lessons of the mission. They had experienced fear, confusion, and near panic, yet they had also witnessed the extraordinary dedication of humans. They understood that in the universe, misunderstanding was almost inevitable, but with patience and careful observation, it could be corrected. The experience reshaped their perception of humans. No longer just a distant, curious species, humanity was now a partner, a potential ally, and a civilization capable of moral judgment and care. This realization had long-term implications for diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange between the two species. As the human fleet began its journey back to Earth, Dr. Rowe and her colleagues spent time reflecting quietly. The mission had achieved its goals in every measurable sense. Lives had been saved, the plague had been contained, and trust had been established. Yet the most profound successes were intangible. The lessons learned about communication, patience, and empathy. The medical team recognized that the story they would tell on Earth would inspire caution and educate future generations. It was a story of resilience, humanity, and the capacity to overcome misunderstanding through deliberate action and mutual respect. The world on Earth responded to the mission with pride, and a renewed sense of purpose. Scientific institutions held conferences to study the mission, analyzing every aspect from communication protocols to medical techniques. Governments revised interstellar mission policies, emphasizing careful planning, clarity, and cooperation. Schools and universities used the story as an example of ethical decision-making, teamwork, and the importance of empathy in high-stakes situations. The narrative became more than a tale of interstellar aid. It became a symbol of humanity's potential when it faced the unknown with courage and integrity. One of the lasting lessons of the mission was the understanding that success often depends on more than skill or technology. The humans had advanced medical knowledge, sophisticated spacecraft, and powerful warships, but it was their ability to navigate cultural differences, demonstrate empathy, and act patiently that ultimately ensured the mission's success. The Zephyrians, in turn, had shown that careful observation, intelligence, and openness to learning could bridge gaps even with an entirely foreign species. Together, the two civilizations had created a blueprint for cooperation that would influence their relationship for generations. Reflecting on the entire experience, Dr. Rowe understood that humanity's journey into the stars would be defined not just by exploration, science, or conquest, but by the ability to connect, communicate, and collaborate with others. The mission had tested humans in every way imaginable, emotionally, intellectually, and morally. It had taught them that mistakes were inevitable, but recoverable, and that resilience required humility, clarity, and determination. The lessons learned would guide future missions, ensuring that humanity approached the universe not with arrogance or fear, but with curiosity, respect, and the willingness to learn. By the time the fleet returned to Earth, the story of the mission had already begun to spread. People everywhere were captivated by the drama, tension, and ultimate triumph of humanity's first real contact with an alien civilization. The narrative emphasized not only the medical achievements but also the courage, patience, and ingenuity required to navigate the extraordinary challenges of interstellar diplomacy. It became a symbol of hope and a reminder of what could be achieved when humans faced uncertainty with intelligence, empathy, and perseverance. In the end, the aftermath of the mission was a testament to humanity's potential. The experience had reshaped understanding, built trust, and established a foundation for cooperation with a species beyond the stars. Humans returned with knowledge, memories, and stories that would influence science, diplomacy, and culture for generations. The Zephyrians returned to their society healthier and wiser, aware that the universe was full of possibilities for friendship, collaboration, and shared growth. Both species had learned that even in the face of fear and misunderstanding, compassion, patience, and determination could transform a near catastrophe into a historic achievement. The mission concluded not with fanfare, but with quiet reflection. Humans and Zephyrians alike took stock of what had been accomplished, what had been learned, and how it would shape the future. For humanity, it was a reminder that in the vast unknown universe, the greatest tools were not always technology or firepower, but empathy, communication, and the courage to act with integrity. The story of the mission would live on as a symbol of what could be achieved when different civilizations came together, faced challenges with humility and patience, and worked toward a shared goal: the preservation of life, the building of trust, and the forging of a future in which cooperation, not conflict, was the guiding principle.